your first year, you've already fielded 250 phone calls. What does that tell you about the state of human trafficking in Canada and maybe even more importantly here in Alberta?
Well, for me, it answers the question of whether or not this is really an issue. Chrysalis takes the position that human trafficking and exploitation are mental health issues. And that's our bias. We are mental health workers. I'm a counseling specialist, a psychologist that specializes in treating complex PTSD. There was a question when we first launched the project about whether or not this kind of service was required, whether it was necessary. Our experience over the last year has shown that very clearly a service of this kind is needed. There are clearly people in the commercial sex industry who are in extreme mental health distress, and they are reaching out for help on the Chrysalis line.
Now, you've done this with little to no advertising. We identified earlier in the show that this is largely by word of mouth. Are you surprised then by the fact that there have been 250 phone calls?
This is the power of community. I am surprised. I had expected it to be less because we have no dollars at all to run the line. So every phone number that's been given out has been given out by somebody we know. They've heard about us on the radio, through media, et cetera, et cetera. So we were surprised that many called. We've actually had calls from the United States, which I didn't even know our crisis line would work there. But we've had about 5 calls from the USA from people who don't have a service there as well. And those are survivors that we support. We also have survivors who call on a regular basis. So some people will call once, and there are several people who call several times. One woman called, I think, in a 2 or 2.5 week period. She called every single day for almost 2.5 weeks. She was extremely suicidal, and she kept calling until she had stabilized. So
they are extremely desperate when they are at the point where they can reach out to you.
By the time they get to us, they're usually in pretty serious trouble. Lots and lots and lots has happened in their lives. Usually if they're in the commercial sex industry, there's a lot of trauma history there anyway. And because they're working in the commercial sex industry and they're perceived to be there by choice, they often feel judged by other members of society. So they tend not to reach out to the general crisis lines. They tend not to seek mainstream mental health services. And one woman who called our line told us that we were her only friend, and we were the only person she could tell what was actually happening in her world.
Who are these people? Does it reach out beyond the sex trade?
We're looking to attract callers from the labor industry because we know for a fact that there are labor cases going on in Alberta. Everybody who's called the line so far has been in the commercial sex industry side. So we know for a fact that trauma is happening on the labor side, but they have not found their way to our door yet.
In a sense, you've been forced to grow over the past year. You started operating 18 hours a day, I believe.
Yes.
You're now 24/7.
We are.
And you're finding also that you need to operate in different languages.
Absolutely. Actually, when we did this interview to launch Chrysalis last year, we talked about the importance of having services in other languages because we know that survivors are experiencing trauma and people who are in the commercial sex industry and labor exploitation are speaking other languages. When we were recruiting from Alberta, we had English speakers only, but we've managed to add French, Arabic, Punjabi, and pretty soon Sinhalese to the network. So that's a little bit. I would love to have people who speak Hungarian and Thai, Mandarin, that kind of thing. It's just a question of recruitment and who finds their way to our door in terms of volunteers.
And when you spoke with us last year about this, you pointed out one of the aims was to take pressure off law enforcement.
Yes.
Are you finding that that is in fact happening?
Yes, in fact, I work with law enforcement quite extensively. They do refer to the line. We actually ship them to Peel Regional Police, to Edmonton Police Service, to York Regional Police in Ontario. They regularly refer people to us, and for them, it's a huge burden because we know that initially law enforcement was carrying the burden in terms of victim support, so now that's huge pressure. So they can focus their resources and their attention on investigating the case as opposed to managing and supporting the victim.
And now when you launched, you relied on volunteer services in the Edmonton area with the headquarters, but has that grown in the past year?
It has. So with the help of the media and all the coverage that we've received, I've had people who've reached out to me from other provinces. So we designed a form of training where we could actually have online training and national conference calls. So we currently have a counselor from Vancouver Island. We have a couple of counselors from Toronto. We have counselors from Calgary. I just got a volunteer request today from Red Deer. So we're able now to expand our services and draw more and more people into our network. And I think that's going to help with the language problem because when we start recruiting out of province, we're going to probably do better in terms of increasing our bilingual counselor base.
And do you need more volunteers still?
Absolutely. I mean, it's a 24-hour line. Right now we have 28 counselors, but some of them are covering multiple shifts. So we're looking specifically for people with a background in mental health, specifically working with traumatized populations, and preferably who speak another language.
So you're 1 year into the books. What does 2012 hold for you? What do you focus on?
Well,
you're already busy.
Oh, we're already busy. And one of the things that we did besides launch the crisis line this past year is Chrysalis also co-managed with Stop the Traffic the National Freedom Relay, which is the first relay in Canadian history focused on survivors of human trafficking and exploitation. It started in Newfoundland and ended in BC. We had about 750 people involved across the country, and I think we raised about $15,000 across the country. So that was one thing. So we'll be doing the second version of Freedom Relay. That's going to become an annual event for fundraising, for collaboration, interprovincial collaboration. Part of what came out of the Relay project was that I'm going to be chairing a national roundtable on human trafficking with players and stakeholders across Canada, because right now we're working in isolation. The people who are trafficking are not. They're working in networks. They're moving people across provincial lines. They're moving people in and out of the country. We need to do the same on the solution side of the equation.
Are you still facing an uphill battle in terms of not only awareness of human trafficking, but recognition that it, as you identified earlier in our conversation, that people aren't necessarily believing that it exists?
We're getting better. Public education is the key. Awareness is the key. And slowly but surely, we're breaking down that wall of denial that says it doesn't happen in Canada. We absolutely know that people are being trafficked in this country. That is very, very clear. We know that people are being exploited domestically. We don't know how many. We don't know how long. Little by little by little, we're discovering that.
And is the support there for those victims?
I believe so, but unfortunately it's piecemeal support at this point because we don't have a government strategy, we don't have a national action plan, we don't have government funding. So everything that we're doing in the Chrysalis Network is being paid for out of other people's volunteer time, out of personal pocketbooks, out of citizen fundraising efforts. When we get to the point where we have long-term government stable funding that will allow us to train people appropriately, create safe houses, et cetera, that's when this thing is really going to start turning around. And the big project for Chrysalis in 2012 is I'm working now on a funding proposal. Funding proposals take a lot of energy to put together, but I'm working on a proposal right now for a 3-year plan to train and certify mental health workers across Canada in specialist work in this population, and we're looking for long-term funding to do that.
Jacqui, thank you kindly for this update.
Thank you so much.
That's Jacqui Linder with the Chrysalis Anti-Human Trafficking Network.